India Today now gets you the first images of the direct aerial encounter between US and Russia on Black Sea. This is a dramatic video that shows a Russian Su-27 fighter jet approaching from the rear, from the side of the US MQ-9 Reaper drone, and then jettisoning fuel, dumping fuel close to it. Was this to cut off the camera feed? What was the purpose? And then when you look at the video feed once again, the blade of the MQ-9, the propeller, watch very carefully. This is fuel being jettisoned. Then the propeller is damaged. Russia, of course, has claimed that the drone was approaching its territory. There was no contact. The drone went in tailspin and crashed into the Black Sea. The US has blamed the Su-27. Two Su-27 fighter jets intercepted the MQ-9. The US insists the drone was being operated in international airspace and not Russian airspace. Of course, Ukraine has made it very clear Crimea is not Russian airspace. That was international airspace. Let me quickly bring in our guests on the show. I have Angad Singh, a very well-respected aviation expert, joining us on the broadcast. Also with me is Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar to talk about the diplomatic fallout of this. In a moment, we'll be joined by India Today's Shiv Arur. But Angad, let me begin by you. This is about 40-45 second long clip. What do you make of it? Was this intentional? Was this a pilot error?
Yeah, to start off, it was definitely a pilot error. I think it was definitely a pilot error because, things do get hairy on intercepts like this when the Chinese intercept people over the South China Sea or indeed the Russians over what they consider their backyard. But at no point does a professional pilot ever want to touch another aircraft with his own aircraft, because there's no telling what can go wrong. It's not so much a question of Sukhoi versus MQ-9 or anything like that. It's just that any intentional contact between the two aircraft could result in disaster for the ramming aircraft. In this case, the Sukhoi. So I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just, shall we say, a mistake, poor airmanship.
So it was poor airmanship. That's what the Americans also seem to indicate. But once again, the dumping of fuel, the images that we see on our television screens right now, the jettisoning of fuel, does that appear to be intentional to disorient the drone, to ensure the cameras don't function?
Absolutely, it's intentional. The Sukhoi has a fuel dump system that pours fuel into the afterburner section of the engine, and then when the afterburner doesn't ignite, you withhold ignition, and the fuel just streams out of the jet with the jet exhaust. Now, I don't think that was done so much to blind the sensors as much as it could have been to shut down the drone. Because if you look at the path the Sukhoi is flying, it looks like he's trying to overtake the drone and then sort of envelope it in that dumped fuel. And I think that could be a tactic to try and starve the engine of the MQ-9 and trigger a flame out or something like that, and have it recovered more or less intact by Russian forces, if that's possible, or just warded off by accomplishing a mission, an end to that mission. Because the sensors have all have glass apertures that at that speed, at that height, fuel would pretty much just wash off of those. So I think it was more to shut down the engine.
Okay. Ambassador Sajjanhar, in your view, would this lead to an escalation, a diplomatic standoff, or are the Americans just likely to perhaps protest and then move on, sir?
You know, at the moment, meaning it definitely has the potential of an escalation. But I think what the Americans are doing is that they are not, wanting to ratchet up the tension. We've been saying right from the beginning, when the war started last February, that there are all the chances of an accident taking place. And this, of course, however you characterize it, however you qualify it, because, I don't know, you'll have to define what a pilot error is. Because error is when you don't want to do something and something happens. But here, obviously, we have seen that, the fuel was dumped on the drone, and it was not unintentional. It was done intentionally. It was not an error by the pilot. Now, as far as the Sukhoi and the MQ-9, they coming in contact and they colliding and clashing, that also cannot be, meaning either it is very, very unprofessional on the part of the pilot of the Sukhoi that it has happened. But obviously it has happened, and, what is said is that even the Sukhoi has been damaged, and the drone has gone down to the Black Sea. So I think this is an accident that has happened. I'm sure that neither of the two sides wanted this to happen. So it would really, depend upon the sagacity and the maturity of the two sides, that they don't overplay, they don't ratchet up the emotions beyond a point.
Okay.
Of course, making it very clear that this is the Americans making it very clear, number one, that they were flying in international airspace, and number two, that this sort of action will not be tolerated. But I think both
this is deliberate. This is deliberate. Angad, the dumping of fuel is deliberate. Would that be seen by the Americans, as some have argued, an act of war, deliberately targeting, though it was an unmanned combat aerial vehicle? But you'd recall there has been an incident between China and the United States of America. The Chinese pilot was killed. The American pilot was taken prisoner for some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's the thing. I agree with what the ambassador said. The intercept and the fact that it was reckless and it ended up in a drone being downed was deliberate. The collision itself was not deliberate. The intercept, I mean, the Russians are known for doing this, as are the Chinese for that matter. It's routine for all countries to intercept aircraft in international airspace before they reach sovereign airspace. But it's become a bit of a trademark for the Russians and the Chinese to maneuver aggressively, to maneuver closely, to try and force aircraft to either disengage and move away from their mission path, or in some cases, as in the Hainan Island incident that you're referring to, it ends badly and the Chinese plane rammed the US reconnaissance aircraft. It's exactly what happened this time, except in this case it was a drone. And I think that gives both Russia and the US an off-ramp, in essence. There's a certain deniability to fuel dumping and aggressive maneuvering on the Russian side, because they can claim that they didn't fire a weapon and therefore not an act of war. And for the Americans, they lost a drone, and that's not something to go to war over. And moreover, by releasing the footage as quickly as they've done and as clearly as they've done, they've called Russia's bluff.
They've called Russia's bluff. Ambassador, in your view, would this be some kind of a signal that the Russians were trying to send out? Because everyone's talking about this imminent spring offensive against Ukraine. It could happen very soon. Is this a message to America to not get directly involved or not be so aggressive the way American drones have been? Because the Russians, at least through some, either their ambassador or some of the reports seem to indicate that the drone was gathering intelligence to help the Ukrainian army.
Okay, a couple of things here. I don't think, in my view, the spring offensive has started long time ago. So, I don't think this really signifies or denotes the start of the spring offensive. The other point is that I think Americans have made it very clear, and they have made it a point that they are not going to engage directly as far as the conflict is concerned. They might provide intelligence, they might provide all the wherewithal in terms of arms, equipment. You've seen, even as far as HIMARS are concerned, they have said no more than 70, 80 kilometers range. They are not providing F-16, not providing any of the aircraft. So they don't want to not only not get involved directly, but also not provide offensive weapons to Ukraine, yes, which could do harm, which could do damage to Russia, as far as its internal areas are concerned. So basically, the arms that are being supplied to Ukraine are for defensive purposes, defend themselves against the attack from Russia. So I think in that sense, it signifies to me some sense of frustration and desperation as far as the Russians are concerned. You've seen the sort of, the volleys of rockets and missiles that have been fired even on
including
civilian
on Kiev.
areas.
Yeah.
So here also, I think it is a sign of some sort of desperation that they need to demonstrate that they are powerful, they are strong, and that they can do whatever they
Ukraine
wish.
anyway says Crimea is not Russian territory. The Russians are in violation. The Russians insist that the American drone was in violation of its special airspace. I also want to quickly cut across to India Today's Shiv Arur joining me on the broadcast. Shiv, dramatic, very, very dramatic images. But what's the big picture that emerges? Both Ambassador Sajanhar and Angad Singh are of the opinion it's unlikely to lead to an escalation. What's your take?
Well, there's been a very expected war of words between the United States and Russia. The United States Secretary of Defense called the Russian Defense Minister. They had a conversation, very heated exchange as we are to understand it. But there's been no, quote-unquote retaliation just yet. Whether the destruction of this American drone will lead to an escalation, we'll have to wait and see. Because remember, not very far from where this drone went down is a live conflict that has been escalating for the last 1 year. You were in Ukraine, Gaurav, so you know how, just how volatile things really are, even in the air above Ukraine and over the Black Sea. So I'm sure the United States will want payback at some point or the other at the tactical level against the Russians. They'll obviously be looking for some kind of high-value air target, that can make it look like payback has actually happened. But as you and I both know, things are much more complicated than that. It's not as simple as, one guy hits you and you hit him back. There's a lot of grey zone warfare taking place, in and around Ukraine right now.
Okay.
There's warfare taking place in the invisible domains as well between the United States and Russia. So who knows? Maybe that retaliation will take place or has already taken place in those domains. But for now, this 40-second clip, is the talk of the town across aviation and security circles, because it captures something that is pretty much unthinkable when you think of these two big Cold War superpowers actually going at it in this manner over the Black Sea.
Will this lead to an escalation? What happens next? We'll be tracking that story very closely. For joining me here on this India Today special, Angad Singh, Ambassador Ashok Sajanhar and Shiv Arur, many thanks.